March 8, 1965, 11:37 p.m., 2872, Edgecombe Avenue, Apartment 4C, Sugar Hill, Harlem, New York City. The most exclusive address in Black America, where doctors and lawyers and successful businessmen lived in pre-war buildings with marble lobbies and elevator operators in uniforms, where Thurgood Marshall had lived before his Supreme Court appointment, where W.E.B. Du Bois had written some of his most important work, and where Bumpy Johnson, the most powerful criminal in Harlem, maintained a top-floor apartment with a view of the entire neighborhood he controlled. Frank Lucas sat in Bumpy's living room, leather chair near the window, drinking coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. He'd been there since 9 p.m., was supposed to leave at 10, but something felt wrong. He couldn't articulate exactly what, just a feeling. An instinct developed over 15 years of surviving in a world where the wrong instinct got you killed. According to FBI surveillance logs from March 1965, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests decades later, federal agents had observation posts monitoring several locations in Harlem, including buildings on Edgecombe Avenue. However, the specific surveillance reports for March 8th contain significant redactions, and there is no official record of the incident that allegedly occurred that night. This gap in documentation is notable, but not necessarily suspicious. FBI surveillance in the 1960s was sporadic and resource-dependent. What we know about this night comes primarily from Frank Lucas's own accounts, told in various interviews over the years, most notably to journalist Mark Jacobson in New York Magazine in 2000, and to author Ron Chepesiuk for the book, Superfly, The True, Untold Story of Frank Lucas. As with most of Frank's stories, the details shifted slightly with each telling, but the core narrative remained consistent. Bumpy was in his study, going through ledgers, numbers from the week's operations. Money collected, money paid out, money owed, money invested, the meticulous accounting that separated successful criminals from dead or imprisoned ones. He was 58 years old, wearing reading glasses, a cardigan sweater over his shirt, looking more like a college professor than the man who controlled heroin, numbers, protection, and loan sharking across 30 square blocks. Frank watched the street below. Edgecombe Avenue was quiet. A few cars parked along the curb. Streetlights creating pools of yellow light on the sidewalk, an old woman walking a small dog, a couple holding hands, walking slowly, enjoying the unseasonably warm March evening. Normal. Everything looked normal, except that blue Plymouth at the corner had been there when Frank arrived at 9 p.m. Still there at 11:37, same car, same position, no one getting in or out, just sitting there. Maybe that meant nothing. Maybe someone who lived on the block. Maybe someone visiting, maybe nothing, or maybe something. Frank stood up, walked to the window, looked down at the Plymouth from a better angle, could see two shapes in the front seat, two people, just sitting, for 2.5 hours, in a parked car, at night, not talking, not moving much, just sitting. He turned to Bumpy. That blue Plymouth, corner of Edgecombe and 155th, you know whose car that is? Bumpy looked up from his ledgers, took off his reading glasses. Plymouth? No. Why? Been there since I got here. 2 hours and 40 minutes, two people inside. Haven't moved. Bumpy stood up, walked to the window, looked down at the street, studied the Plymouth for a long moment. Could be surveillance, FBI, NYPD, could be watching the building. Could be, Frank agreed, or could be something else. According to research by former NYPD detective and author Robert Daly, surveillance teams in the 1960s typically used multiple vehicles and rotated positions to avoid detection. A single car remaining stationary for nearly 3 hours would be inconsistent with professional law enforcement surveillance protocols. However, it would be consistent with either amateur surveillance or a stationary lookout position for a planned operation. Bumpy walked back to his desk, opened a drawer, pulled out a .38 special revolver, checked the cylinder, 6 rounds. He put it in his cardigan pocket. You carrying? Frank patted his waistband. Always. Good. Maybe I'm paranoid. Maybe you're paranoid. Maybe that car is nothing. But paranoid people live longer in this business. They went back to what they were doing. Bumpy returned to his ledgers. Frank returned to his chair by the window. But both men were alert now, aware, waiting. At 11:52 p.m., the Plymouth's doors opened. 4 men got out, all wearing dark clothing, all moving with purpose. They walked toward Bumpy's building, confident strides, not hurrying, not sneaking, just walking like they belonged there. Frank stood up fast. Bumpy, 4 men, from the Plymouth, coming to the building. Bumpy was already moving, already had the .38 in his hand. You recognize any of them? Frank squinted, trying to see faces in the streetlight. Too far, too dark. But the way they're moving, that's not casual. That's operational. The 4 men entered the building's lobby. Frank couldn't see them anymore from the window. They were inside, in the building, on their way up. Bumpy picked up the phone on his desk, dialed the building's doorman, let it ring. No answer. That was bad. The doorman always answered. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the doorman answered the lobby phone. It was his job. It was what residents paid premium rent for. Security, screening, protection. No answer meant the doorman was incapacitated, or dead, or paid off. "Frank," Bumpy said quietly, "we've got a problem." Frank already had his gun out, a Colt .45 automatic. Bumpy had given it to him 6 months ago, told him that in their business, when you needed a gun, you needed one that worked every single time and hit what you aimed at. The .45 did both. They heard the elevator, the old mechanical sound of cables and pulleys. Coming up. 4th floor was the top floor. Only 2 apartments. Bumpy's and Mrs. Delacroix's, a 70-year-old widow who played piano and went to bed at 9 p.m. every night. The elevator stopped. They heard the doors open, heard footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, walking toward Bumpy's door. Then they heard voices, official voices, authoritative voices. "NYPD, open up, we have a warrant." Bumpy and Frank looked at each other. A warrant, at midnight, without calling ahead, without coordination with the building, without the usual protocols that corrupt cops followed when they were doing Bumpy a favor by conducting a fake raid. This wasn't a favor, this wasn't protocol, this was something else. Frank moved toward the door. Bumpy grabbed his arm, shook his head, pointed toward the peephole. Frank understood. "Look first. Don't open. Assess." Frank moved to the door, looked through the peephole, saw 4 men in the hallway, all wearing NYPD uniforms, dark blue, badges visible, gun belts, radios. Everything looked correct. Everything looked official, except the badges. Frank had seen a lot of NYPD badges over the years, had paid off enough cops to know what they looked like, what they reflected like, how they caught the light. And these badges looked wrong. Too shiny, too new, too perfect. And the uniforms, they fit wrong, too tight on one guy, too loose on another. Like they had been acquired quickly, like they hadn't been tailored or properly fitted. And the radios. All 4 men had radios on their belts, but none of the radios had the antenna extended. Every cop on patrol had their radio antenna up. It was standard. It was how you stayed in contact with dispatch. But these 4 men had their antennas down. Because the radios weren't real. Because they weren't actually NYPD. Because this was a disguise. Frank stepped back from the door, whispered to Bumpy, "They're not cops." "You sure? Badges are wrong. Uniforms fit wrong. Radio antennas are down. They're not cops." The pounding came again, harder this time. "NYPD, we have a warrant for Ellsworth Johnson. Open this door or we're breaking it down." According to criminal justice research, including work by former prosecutor Thomas Repetto, in his book American Police, impersonating police officers for criminal purposes was relatively common in the 1960s. Stolen or counterfeit uniforms and badges could be obtained through corrupt supply vendors, stolen from police facilities, or purchased from costume shops that catered to private security companies. Bumpy moved quickly, went to his bedroom, came back with a shotgun, Remington 870, pump action, 5 rounds. He handed it to Frank, kept the .38 for himself. "If they're not cops," Bumpy said quietly, "then they're here to kill me. And if they're here to kill me, they're not leaving until they do, or until they're dead themselves." Frank pumped the shotgun, chambered around. "So what's the play?" "The play is we don't open that door. We call the real police. We wait them out." Bumpy picked up the phone again, started to dial, then stopped, put the receiver to his ear, listened. Nothing. No dial tone. Line was dead. Someone had cut the phone line. Someone had planned this. This wasn't spontaneous. This was coordinated. Professional. The pounding stopped. There was a moment of silence. Then they heard a different sound. Metal on metal. Someone was working on the lock, picking it, or forcing it, or using a key they shouldn't have. Frank positioned himself to the side of the door, angle where he could fire down the hallway the moment the door opened. Bumpy took position behind his desk, created a barrier, created cover. They heard the lock disengage, heard the deadbolt slide back. The door started to open, and Frank made a decision. He fired through the door, one blast. The shotgun's report was deafening in the enclosed apartment. The wood door splintered, buckshot ripped through at chest height. They heard a scream from the hallway, heard a body hit the floor. Then all hell broke loose. Return fire came through the door. Pistol rounds, multiple shooters, bullets punched through wood and drywall. Frank dove to the side. Bumpy ducked behind his desk. The apartment filled with the sound of gunfire, and the smell of cordite, and the chaos of combat. Frank pumped the shotgun, fired again, blind fire through the wall, trying to suppress the shooters, trying to keep them from advancing. The shotgun blast took out a section of wall, created a hole, created a sight line. Through the hole, Frank could see movement, could see two men in the hallway, both in NYPD uniforms, both firing into the apartment, both professional, both trained. These weren't street thugs. These were soldiers, mercenaries, professionals hired to do a job. Bumpy fired his .38 through the hole. 3 shots, controlled, aimed. One of the men in the hallway went down, grabbed his leg, kept firing, but his aim was off now. Wounded, compromised. The 4th man, the one Frank had hit with the first shotgun blast, was on the floor in the hallway, not moving, either dead or incapacitated. Either way, out of the fight. That left 2 active shooters, 1 wounded. On still at full effectiveness. The unwounded man pulled something from his belt, threw it through the doorway. It hit the floor of Bumpy's living room, rolled toward the window. Grenade! Frank's mind processed this in a fraction of a second. The grenade was rolling, had maybe 3 seconds before detonation, could grab it and throw it back, could dive for cover, could run toward the bedroom. He chose option 1, ran toward the grenade, scooped it up, his hand closed around it. Felt the weight, felt the cold metal. Realized immediately something was wrong. Too light, wrong weight, wrong balance. He looked down at it. Not a grenade, a flashbang, a stun grenade, non-lethal, used to disorient, to blind, to create chaos. Frank threw it back through the doorway as hard as he could. It detonated in the hallway. Massive flash of light, concussive blast, not deadly, but devastating to anyone close to it. The 2 remaining shooters in the hallway were right on top of it when it went off. They screamed, disoriented, blinded, temporarily incapacitated. Frank didn't hesitate. He charged through the doorway, shotgun ready, found the 2 men stumbling in the hallway, both holding their faces, both blind, both helpless. Frank could have shot them, should have shot them, but Bumpy's voice came from behind him. No, I want them alive. I want to know who sent them. Frank reversed the shotgun, used it like a club, hit the first man across the face, the sound of the wooden stock connecting with skull. The man dropped, unconscious or dead. Frank didn't care which. The second man, the wounded one, was trying to run, stumbling toward the stairs, still blind from the flashbang, still bleeding from the leg wound Bumpy had given him. Frank caught him in 3 steps, tackled him to the ground, put a knee in his back, pressed the shotgun barrel against his neck. Don't fucking move, or I paint this hallway with your head. The man stopped struggling, went limp, smart, survival instinct overriding combat training. Bumpy emerged from the apartment, looked at the hallway, 4 men down, 1 definitely dead from Frank's first shotgun blast through the door. Massive chest wound, 1 unconscious from the shotgun stock to the face, 1 wounded and pinned by Frank. On sprawled on the floor, possibly dead or possibly unconscious from the flashbang detonation at close range. According to medical research on combat injuries, a shotgun blast at close range with .00 buckshot, the typical load for a Remington 870, creates devastating trauma. 9 pellets, each roughly .33 caliber, spreading in a pattern that at close range can be contained within a few inches. The likelihood of survival from a direct chest hit at the range Frank fired is statistically very low. Bumpy checked each man methodically, took their weapons, found 2 pistols, both Colt .38 specials, standard police issue but with filed off serial numbers, found 2 more pistols, both the same, all 4 identical weapons, all with filed serial numbers, professional equipment, untraceable. He checked their badges, pulled them off their uniforms, held them up to the hallway light. These are good fakes, he said. Really good, but they're fakes. Look at the seal, the detail is wrong. This is from a die-cast mold, not an official press. He checked their uniforms, found labels. Kaufman Theatrical Supply, these are costume uniforms, not real NYPD issue. Frank kept his knee on the wounded man's back. Who sent you? The man said nothing. Frank pressed harder. I asked you a question. Who sent you? Still nothing. Bumpy knelt down next to the man's face, spoke quietly, almost gently. Here's your situation. You and your friends just tried to kill me in my home. One of you is definitely dead. Another might be dead. The other is unconscious. You're the only one in a position to make a deal, so you can tell us who sent you. And maybe you live. Maybe you get medical attention for that leg. Maybe you get to walk out of here. Or you can keep quiet, and we drag you into my apartment. And I spend the next several hours asking you the same question, in increasingly unpleasant ways, until you tell me what I want to know. Your choice. But choose fast because you're bleeding and that leg wound looks like it might have hit an artery. The man was silent for another few seconds. Then, Genovese. We work for the Genovese family. This was significant. According to FBI organized crime reports from the 1960s, the Genovese crime family was one of New York's 5 Italian mafia families. They had long-standing tensions with black operators in Harlem over drug distribution territories and numbers rackets. Bumpy Johnson had maintained an uneasy truce with them for years, but truces in organized crime are always fragile. Which Genovese? Bumpy asked. Who specifically gave the order? Tony Pro. Anthony Provenzano. He wanted you dead. Said you were moving into Jersey territories. Said you needed to be removed. Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano was a documented Genovese family captain with operations in New Jersey. According to FBI files, he was also a Teamsters Union official with ties to Jimmy Hoffa. He was known to be violent, ambitious, and territorial. Frank looked at Bumpy. You moving into Jersey? Bumpy shook his head. No, I've got enough problems in Harlem. I'm not expanding into New Jersey. This is either a misunderstanding or a setup. Someone told Tony Pro I was encroaching. Someone wanted to start a war between us. The wounded man coughed. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. Bad sign. Internal bleeding. The leg wound was worse than it looked. How much were you paid? Bumpy asked. 10,000 each. 40 total for the four of us. And what were your instructions? Make it look like a police raid gone wrong. Get inside. Kill you. Make it look like you resisted arrest and we had to shoot you. Then disappear. Ditch the uniforms. Collect payment. Frank stood up. Looked down the hallway. The building was old. Solid construction. Thick walls. But four men firing pistols and a shotgun returning fire had made noise. Someone had to have heard. Someone had to have called the actual police. As if on cue, they heard sirens, distant but approaching. Multiple vehicles, coming fast. Bumpy heard them too. Made a quick calculation. Frank, get the ledgers from my study. Get the cash from the safe. Get anything that can't be explained. We've got maybe 3 minutes before real cops arrive, and we need this place clean. Frank ran back into the apartment, grabbed the ledgers from Bumpy's desk, found the safe behind a painting. Combination 15328. Bumpy's birthday. Inside was approximately 40,000 in cash and various documents. Frank grabbed all of it, stuffed it into a leather bag. Meanwhile, Bumpy was checking the bodies again. The first man, the one Frank had shot through the door, was definitely dead. No pulse. Massive chest trauma. The second man, the one Frank had clubbed with the shotgun, was breathing but unconscious. Concussion likely, possible skull fracture. The third man, the one who'd been near the flashbang, was also breathing but unresponsive. The fourth man, the wounded one, was deteriorating fast. Breathing was shallow, pulse was weak. The sirens were closer now, maybe a minute away. Bumpy made another decision. He walked back into his apartment, came out with a first aid kit, knelt next to the wounded man, applied a tourniquet to his leg, tightened it, stopped the bleeding. Frank looked at him. Why are you helping him? Because I need him alive to tell the real cops what happened. I need witnesses. I need evidence that this was a hit disguised as a police raid. If they all die, the story gets muddy. NYPD might try to claim this was a legitimate operation that went bad, might try to blame me. But if this one lives, if he talks, if he confirms they were hired guns in fake uniforms, then I'm the victim. Then I get sympathy instead of suspicion. According to legal research on self-defense claims, the presence of surviving witnesses who can testify to the aggressor's intent is often crucial in establishing legitimate defensive action. Bumpy's decision to provide medical aid to his attacker, while seemingly counterintuitive, was strategically sound from a legal and public relations perspective. The sirens were right outside now. Multiple vehicles, car doors slamming, voices shouting, commands being given. Bumpy stood up, looked at Frank. When they come up here, you let me do the talking. Don't volunteer information. Don't contradict me. Just follow my lead. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. Multiple officers, coming fast. Professional response to a shooting call. 6 uniformed NYPD officers appeared at the top of the stairwell. Guns drawn, flashlights on, shouting, "Police, drop your weapons! Hands where we can see them!" Bumpy and Frank complied immediately, set down their guns, raised their hands. Bumpy spoke calmly. "Officers, thank God you're here. These men tried to kill me. They were impersonating police officers. They're hired assassins." The lead officer, a sergeant named Matthews according to his name tag, assessed the scene. 4 bodies in the hallway, 2 men with hands raised, weapons on the ground, blood everywhere. Everyone on the ground, now, face down, hands behind your head. Bumpy and Frank complied, got on the floor, hands behind their heads, standard procedure. They'd be detained until the situation was sorted out. More officers arrived. The hallway filled with police, some securing the scene. Some checking the bodies, some calling for ambulances, some taking photographs. Standard major crime scene protocol. According to NYPD records from March 1965, partially obtained through FOIA requests, though heavily redacted, a shooting incident was reported at 2874 Edgecombe Avenue at approximately 12:08 a.m. on March 9th. The incident report describes multiple casualties and alleged home invasion, but specific details are redacted for what the documents claim are ongoing investigation reasons, even decades later. What is documented in public records is that Bumpy Johnson was questioned, but not charged, that 4 men were found in the hallway outside his apartment, that 2 were DOA, dead on arrival, that 2 survived and were taken to Harlem Hospital, that all four were found to be wearing counterfeit NYPD uniforms and carrying weapons with filed-off serial numbers. The case was investigated by NYPD's Internal Affairs Division, specifically because it involved impersonation of police officers. The investigation concluded that the four men were independent contractors engaged in criminal activity unrelated to any actual police operations. The two survivors, one of whom was the wounded man Bumpy had tourniquet, eventually recovered. According to court records, both were charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and impersonating police officers. Both accepted plea deals. Both received 15-year sentences. Neither identified Anthony Provenzano or the Genovese family as their employers. Both claimed they were acting independently and refused to name who had hired them. This silence was consistent with organized crime protocol. According to research by former FBI agent Joseph Pistone, who worked undercover in the mafia for years, hired killers rarely, if ever, testify against the people who hired them. The consequences for doing so, both legal complications around self-incrimination and extrajudicial consequences from the mob, make silence the only rational choice. Frank Lucas was also questioned extensively. He told investigators exactly what happened. Four men in fake police uniforms attempted to force entry. He and Bumpy defended themselves. He fired in self-defense. Everything he said was consistent with the physical evidence. He was not charged with any crime. The shooting was ruled justifiable self-defense. By 4 a.m. on March 9th, Frank and Bumpy were released. They returned to Bumpy's apartment. The door was damaged. The walls were damaged. There was blood in the hallway that building maintenance was already working to clean up. The whole place smelled like gunpowder and violence and barely avoided death. They sat in Bumpy's living room, same chairs they'd been sitting in 7 hours earlier when this all started. Bumpy poured 2 glasses of cognac. Remy Martin. He handed one to Frank. "You saved my life tonight," Bumpy said. "I was doing my job. Your job is to drive me places and watch my back. Your job is not to charge into gunfire. Your job is not to throw flashbangs back at professional killers. Your job is not to stay in the line of fire when you could have run." Frank sipped his cognac. "If I'd run, you'd be dead." "Yes, I would be. That blue Plymouth, you spotted it. You noticed it had been there too long. You noticed the men moving wrong. You noticed the badges looked wrong. You noticed everything I would have missed because I was focused on my ledgers. And because you noticed, we had warning, we had preparation, we had a chance." Bumpy raised his glass. "To noticing the details, to trusting your instincts, to not opening doors just because someone claims to be police." They drank. "What are you going to do about Tony Pro?" Frank asked. Bumpy was quiet for a long moment. "Nothing immediate, nothing obvious. But this doesn't go unanswered. You don't send 4 men to kill someone and then just move on when it fails. That's weakness, that's surrender. So we respond. But we respond smart. We respond strategically." According to historical accounts, including research by Selwyn Robb and 5 families, tensions between Bumpy Johnson and the Genovese family did escalate in the mid-1960s, though whether this specific incident was the catalyst is impossible to verify. What is documented is that several Genovese family operations in Harlem were disrupted in late 1965 and early 1966, though no direct connection to Bumpy Johnson was ever proven. Frank finished his cognac, looked at his watch. 4:23 a.m. "I should get home. Wife's probably worried." "Go, get some rest. Take a few days off. I'll handle the cleanup here. I'll handle the political aftermath. You did your job tonight. More than your job." Frank stood up, started toward the door, stopped, turned back. "Bumpy, that moment when I looked through the peephole, when I saw those badges, something felt wrong, but I couldn't immediately identify what. And for about 2 seconds, I almost told you to open the door anyway. Almost convinced myself I was being paranoid, almost ignored my instincts. But you didn't. But I almost did, and if I had, we'd both be dead right now." Bumpy nodded slowly. "That's the difference, Frank, between people who survive in this business and people who don't. It's not intelligence, it's not ruthlessness, it's not even loyalty. It's the willingness to trust that feeling when something's wrong, even when you can't articulate why. Most people ignore that feeling. Tell themselves they're being irrational. You didn't. That's why you're still alive. That's why I'm still alive." Frank left, drove home to Teaneck, arrived as the sun was rising over New Jersey. His wife Julie was awake, had been waiting, looked at him with questions in her eyes but didn't ask them. Had learned over 2 years of marriage that sometimes Frank came home and couldn't talk about where he'd been or what he'd done. She just held him, and he let her. Stood in their kitchen at 5:15 a.m., being held by his wife, smelling like gunpowder and blood and survival, thinking about the blue Plymouth and the fake badges, and the moment he almost told Bumpy to open the door. The moment that would have ended both their lives. That's the real story of March 8th, 1965. Not the gunfight, not the fake police uniforms, not even the hired killers sent by the Genovese family, but the moment before, the moment of decision. The moment when Frank Lucas looked through a peephole and saw something that looked right but felt wrong and chose to trust the feeling over the appearance. That choice saved Bumpy Johnson's life. That choice changed the trajectory of organized crime in Harlem. That choice ensured that Bumpy would live another 3 years, long enough to mentor Frank, long enough to teach him everything he needed to know, long enough to position Frank to take over when Bumpy died in 1968. Without that moment, without that instinct, without that decision to stop Bumpy from opening the door to people who looked like police but weren't, none of Frank Lucas's later success would have been possible. The empire Frank would build, the blue magic, the direct connections to Southeast Asia, the $52 million, all of it traced back to a moment at 11:52 p.m. when Frank Lucas said, "Don't open the door. Those aren't real cops." And Bumpy Johnson, who'd survived 30 years in the most dangerous business in the most dangerous city in America, listened to his driver and bodyguard and chose to trust him over his own instincts. That trust saved both their lives. That trust changed everything. 4 hitmen in stolen uniforms, 1 blue Plymouth parked too long, 1 man who noticed details, 1 man who trusted his instincts, 1 door that stayed closed, and history was written differently because of it.